It was late October when my friend Mike called me with a friendly request. I'd meant it sincerely. It wasn't like Mike was asking for much. Just 2 nights at his new house while he was off on some business trip. He hadn't had time to install all the locks and cameras. The place was in a bit of a limbo, a recently bought fixer-upper at the edge of town, far from where anyone else would be able to just drop by to check on things. But as Mike tossed me his keys, a strange look passed over his face. He had this half-smile, half-something else expression. There's been 1 or 2 weird things, he'd said. I mean, probably nothing. Just noises, some stuff out of place. I'd laughed it off. Dude, all old houses are weird. The plumbing's probably ancient. Yeah, sure, he'd mumbled, glancing away. But thanks. Seriously, just 2 nights. After he left, I didn't give it much more thought. I was looking forward to the time alone, maybe playing a few games and just enjoying the peace and quiet. If anything, I'd get a good story to mess with him about if I found out the weirdness was a leaky pipe or a stuck window. The first night was uneventful. The weather, though, now that was a different story. A storm had come rolling in right as dusk settled, a thick wall of dark clouds blanketing the sky. It wasn't long before the rain hit, a heavy downpour that rattled the old windows. The wind made the trees groan and creak like they were alive. Every so often, a gust would bring a deep, muffled creak from above, like something heavy was shifting in the rafters. I chalked it up to the house settling, shrugged it off, and got back to my game, the sound of raindrops drumming against the roof blending with the distant, constant creaks. Saturday morning came quietly. I woke up late, had a lazy breakfast, and settled into Mike's living room with his PlayStation for the day. The hours passed quickly as I buried myself in one game after another, using the storm outside as the perfect excuse to stay wrapped up in the digital world. By evening, hunger finally forced me to pause. I headed to the kitchen, pulled together a quick meal, and started making coffee. That's when I heard the first real, unmistakable sound of footsteps. They were soft at first, like someone tiptoeing across the floor above me. The ceiling seemed to breathe with each step, a subtle shift, then a settling, then another soft, eerie creak. I froze, hand halfway to the coffee pot, listening, trying to convince myself it was some weird echo of my own movements. But then it happened again, distinct, heavy, unmistakable. Someone was upstairs. My heart thudded painfully, my mind racing through a million different explanations, each one worse than the last. Maybe it was just the house, the way old wood shifts, the noise amplified by the storm. But the steps were too deliberate, too human. Gritting my teeth, I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a rusty wrench I'd seen lying around in Mike's toolbox, and headed for the stairs. Each step echoed in the stillness, the house silent except for the faint crackle of rain outside. Halfway up, the footsteps stopped, followed by a chilling silence. I paused, muscles tense, every nerve screaming at me to turn around, to just walk out of there. But I pushed forward, the hall stretching in front of me, empty and dim. The door at the end, leading up to the attic, was slightly ajar. I tried to steel myself, swallowed, and shouted, "Hello!" Nothing. Gathering what little courage I had, I took a deep breath, nudged the door open fully, and peered up the narrow stairs. At the top stood a man. He was just standing there, his face shadowed, his posture so still it looked unnatural. He wasn't hunched or hiding, just standing calmly like he belonged there. "Hey!" I yelled, my voice trembling despite my efforts to sound firm. The man didn't respond, didn't move. He just watched me as though he'd been waiting. Then, without a word, he turned, walked over to a small window, and with a strange, almost graceful movement, threw himself through it. The sound of breaking glass shattered the silence, and I raced up the stairs, my pulse hammering as I reached the window. Through the rain, I could see him, his dark figure disappearing into the shadows of the tree line. I backed away from the window, barely able to catch my breath. Was he still out there? Was he watching me? My hands shook as I pulled out my phone, called the police, and tried to explain what had happened. When they arrived, they searched the property, asking me questions that made me feel foolish, like I was wasting their time. But the look on their faces shifted when one of the officers came back to the porch, holding something in his gloved hand. Chicken bones. And they weren't just scattered. They'd been placed carefully, arranged in a pattern I didn't understand. There were also remnants of candles, bits of chalk forming some kind of symbol that had smeared and faded in the rain. The officer gave me a long, measured look. "Is this part of some prank?" he asked, his voice carrying a note of suspicion. I shook my head, unable to tear my eyes away from the eerie remnants on the porch. After they left, I locked the doors as best I could, but no amount of makeshift locks could keep out the feeling that something was very, very wrong with the place. All night, I sat huddled in the living room, too afraid to sleep, listening to every creak, every whisper of the wind. The rain continued to tap against the windows, masking whatever might be lurking in the shadows outside. By morning, I didn't bother packing or even tidying up. I grabbed my stuff and drove away, feeling a strange mix of relief and dread as I left Mike's house behind me. A few weeks later, Mike called, sounding oddly subdued. He didn't bring up the incident. In fact, he didn't mention anything about the house at all. I thought it was over. I wanted to believe it was over. But sometimes, on those cold, quiet nights when I find myself alone, I still hear footsteps above me. It's always the same pattern, the same slow, deliberate tread. And each time, I wonder if maybe, just maybe, something had followed me back that night from Mike's strange, creaking old house. It was one of those rare Friday nights when I had absolutely nothing to do. After weeks of assignments, group projects, and back-to-back classes, I finally had a chance to breathe. My parents were out of town for the night, visiting some family friends, and I'd just returned from college, my last class thankfully canceled. The house was quiet, familiar in its stillness. Just me, the old couch, and a massive bag of snacks. As I sank into the cushions with a bag of chips and a soda, I flipped through the movie options on TV until I found an old horror classic. Something cheesy enough to laugh at, but creepy enough to keep me entertained. Perfect. Halfway through the movie, just when things were picking up, my phone buzzed. I glanced down, expecting a message from a friend or maybe one of my parents. Instead, the notification read, "Clockwise, rotation." I stared at the message, confused. Wrong number, I figured, and dismissed it. A few minutes later, another one came through. Light spills from the window, illuminating the carpet. Now that was odd. I looked around, frowning. It was true. The floor lamp beside the couch cast a soft, yellow glow onto the carpet. But it was such a random observation. I shook my head, feeling a small flicker of unease but pushing it aside. Maybe some bored prankster was messing with the wrong person. I settled back into the movie, but my phone buzzed again. Arm draped over the side, fingers just out of reach. This time, the words made me pause. My arm was resting exactly like that, draped over the edge of the couch. A prickle of anxiety crawled up my spine, but I told myself it was probably just a coincidence. But who could guess something so specific? I checked the windows, glancing around the room. There was nothing but the soft hum of the fridge, the flickering TV, and the occasional creak of the house settling. I was alone, so I convinced myself to ignore the messages, telling myself they were random and meaningless. Then another notification lit up my screen. Back against the couch, barely moving. "You keep looking at your phone." This time, the fear hit me square in the chest. I felt like I was being watched. My mind raced, scanning the room for some logical explanation. The blinds were drawn, but it didn't feel like enough to hide me from whatever this was. I didn't want to give in to the panic creeping into my throat, but I couldn't help it. I got up, peered through the living room blinds, and scanned the empty street. Nothing. Only a single car parked across the road. It was one I hadn't noticed before, but maybe it had just arrived. For a moment, I thought I could see a faint shape inside, but the glare from the headlights reflecting off the glass made it impossible to tell. Then, the headlights switched on, blinding me with a sharp, bright light that pierced through the window. I jumped back, heart hammering in my chest, blinking to clear the afterimage of the light from my vision. Whoever was in that car had to be the one messaging me. I lifted my phone, my fingers trembling as I opened the messages. Another one had come through. "Nice view, isn't it? Or is the light too bright for you?" My hands shook, my breathing quickening. I forced myself to text back. "Who is this?" No response. I waited, glancing out the window again. The car was still there, headlights unwavering, illuminating the front of the house like a stage. The phone buzzed once more. "Take another look." I glanced out again, squinting against the harsh light. And just as I did, the headlights clicked off. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, and I realized with a sinking feeling that I still couldn't make out who was in the car. My phone buzzed again. Getting scared, I dropped the phone on the coffee table, bile rising in my throat. This was getting out of hand. I needed to call someone. I dialed my parents, hoping they'd pick up and ease my nerves, but the phone rang and rang, eventually going to voicemail. I cursed under my breath and called again. No answer. I considered texting some friends, but what could I say? "Hey, I think someone's watching me from a car outside?" Sounded absurd. As I weighed my options, another message appeared. "Your parents aren't answering. Don't bother calling." My mind was racing. Asterisk, how did they know? How could they possibly know? Asterisk, I swallowed, feeling trapped, like the walls of my own house were closing in on me. I tried calling 911. It seemed ridiculous, but I didn't care. As I held the phone to my ear, glancing out the window again, I noticed something chilling. The car was gone. The street was empty, dark and silent. The phone buzzed in my hand before I could hear the dispatcher's voice. "Missed me." I felt a scream lodge itself in my throat, but it wouldn't come out. I ended the 911 call, too rattled to even explain myself. Who was this person? What did they want? I texted back, feeling equal parts furious and terrified. "Who are you? What do you want?" The reply was instant. "Don't worry. We'll meet soon." I dropped my phone as if it were burning my hand, the words searing themselves into my mind. It wasn't just some prank. Someone was targeting me, watching my every move. A horrifying realization dawned on me. This wasn't going to stop. They were here for me. I thought of leaving the house, maybe driving off to a friend's place, but I was frozen with fear, paralyzed by the sense of helplessness. The shadows in the room seemed to grow darker, stretching toward me, closing in around me. I tried to calm myself, telling myself this was just some sick joke. But my phone buzzed one last time, with a short, chilling message that made my blood run cold. "You can't hide from me." The next morning, I left for college earlier than I ever had, heart still pounding as if that car were lurking around every corner. I didn't stay at home alone for a long, long time, and even now, sometimes I'll catch a glimpse of headlights out of the corner of my eye, watching, waiting, like it never truly ended. It was a late October, and I'd just returned from a short trip to visit some friends a couple of hours away. It was evening by the time I arrived back, tired from the drive but relieved to be home. There's always something reassuring about walking into your own space after being away. The familiar scent, the warmth, the quiet. I dropped my bag by the front door, kicked off my shoes, and flipped on the lights, watching as each room filled with a soft glow. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it. After unpacking a few things, I went about my usual routine. I grabbed a snack, checked my messages, scrolled through social media for a bit, and eventually settled down in front of the TV to unwind. The house was silent, with only the occasional creak from the floorboards breaking the stillness. I had no reason to think this night would be any different from the hundreds of other nights I'd spent alone at home. But then came the moment I decided to head to bed. That's when I noticed it. My bedroom door was shut. Not unusual on its own, but when I tried to open it, it wouldn't budge. Puzzled, I jiggled the handle a few times, thinking it might be stuck. I leaned down, inspecting the lock, and realized something odd. The door was locked, but from the outside. My key was missing. A frown creased my forehead. I always kept that key on a small hook by the door, yet now it was gone. I tried to convince myself that maybe I'd misplaced it, that perhaps in my rush to unpack, I'd dropped it somewhere. I went back to the kitchen, rummaging around the countertops and searching my bag, thinking maybe I'd absent-mindedly tucked it away somewhere. And then I heard it. At first, it was soft, barely audible over my own breathing. A faint scratching sound, like something rubbing against wood, came from down the hall in the direction of my bedroom. The sound sent a prickle of unease up my spine, a sickening sensation that this wasn't just the house settling. No, this sound was deliberate. I stood there, frozen, straining my ears to catch any other sounds, any small indication that I wasn't alone. But silence had returned, thick and unsettling. Swallowing my unease, I forced myself to continue searching for the key, convinced that once I found it, this feeling would vanish. As I made my way back toward the bedroom, the sound started up again, louder this time, like something scraping across the inside of the door. I stopped in my tracks. My first instinct was to shout, but the words stuck in my throat. There was no logical explanation for this. I was alone, right? I tried the handle again, pulling and pushing, even bracing my shoulder against the door, but it wouldn't give. It was locked firmly from the inside. I shouted again, louder this time, my voice shaky as I demanded, "Who's in there?" No answer. Feeling increasingly frantic, I tore through every possible spot where the key might be. The living room, the bathroom, the kitchen cabinets, even places I knew it couldn't logically be, I searched. Yet the key was nowhere to be found. Then, as I passed back into the hallway, something chilling happened. I heard the sound of a key turning, a soft, unmistakable click from behind my bedroom door. I froze, staring at the door as it slowly creaked open a few inches, a thin sliver of darkness spilling into the hall. Heart hammering, I took a step back, barely able to breathe, when suddenly, the door swung open the rest of the way, and a figure shot out, a blur of movement. I caught only a glimpse, a shadowy silhouette, tall and thin, wearing dark clothes. My instinct to run was overpowered by sheer shock as the figure darted down the hallway, heading straight for the front door. Without thinking, I stumbled after it, trying to force my mind to remember details. A shape, a face, anything. But the person was fast, already at the door, his hand on the knob. As he yanked it open and disappeared into the night, I managed to catch one last glimpse of him vanishing around the corner of the house across the street. For a few seconds, I stood there, numb, every nerve in my body on edge. Who had that been? How had he gotten in? The thought of how long he'd been there, hidden in my own home, made my skin crawl. I fumbled for my phone and dialed 911, barely able to keep my voice steady as I explained to the operator what had happened. The police arrived quickly, scanning the area, checking for any signs of forced entry. They walked through each room, but everything looked untouched. No broken windows, no tampered locks, and, according to them, no sign that anyone else had been there. I insisted they search the neighborhood, hoping they'd find something, but they found nothing. Whoever it was had vanished without a trace. After the police left, I locked every door and window, checked them again, and sat in the living room, feeling that strange silence settle back over the house. Every creak, every rustle, every shift of the floorboards felt magnified, each sound sending fresh waves of paranoia down my spine. I kept telling myself it was over, that the intruder was gone. But as I sat there, staring at the front door, my eyes fell on a small metallic object lying just inside the doorframe. It was my bedroom key, sitting there as if it had been placed deliberately.